So let's learn more about conditions. What do these requirements have in common? Only members of the QA team should be able to close issues. Only the current assignee should be able to start progress on an issue. And no invoices should be sent until payment terms have been defined. Let's take a look at the answer. All of these requirements, as shown especially in bold, are situations that must exist before a transition can be executed. They are prerequisites for the transition. A condition specifies a situation that must exist before something else is possible or permitted. It's a prerequisite and controls if a transition is available to be used. Conditions control either who performs a transition or under what circumstances. In this example, teams in space want only developers to be able to send an issue for code review. This can be achieved by adding a condition to the code review transition. So only the users who are in the developer's role can see this transition. But remember that users also need the transition issue's permission to see and execute transitions at all. If a condition fails, the user will not see the transition button when viewing the issue, and therefore not be able to execute it. The most common use cases involve either something about the current user, the who, or the current state of the issue, the what. Conditions can take into considerations whether the user is the reporter, assignee, or in a particular project role or group. For example, you can restrict an approval transition to only users who are in the approver's project role. Conditions can also check the user's permission. For example, does the user have the Resolve Issues permission? Conditions can also take into account something about the state of the issue. For example, has code review been committed against this issue? Or the status of the issue's subtasks. For example, you can restrict the parent from transitioning to done until all of its subtasks have been resolved or closed. In the previous slide, we saw that you can add either groups or project roles into workflow conditions. In fact, both project roles and groups can be used in many other places, including permission and notification schemes, issue security levels, comment visibility, and the sharing of filters and dashboards. So let's explore their differences. In short, groups are used across Jira, whereas roles fulfill particular functions within a project. First, Jira administrators must create the project roles. But once created, project role membership is project-specific, whereas group membership is always global. Project administrators can therefore manage membership on a project-by-project basis, so changes can be made quickly if membership changes. This takes the load off of Jira administrators, because they are the only ones who can manage groups. And finally, roles help to reduce the number of schemes, because schemes can be more generic and therefore shared. Let's take a look at an example. 3 HR projects, hiring, PTO, and expenses, share the same workflow. In that workflow, there are conditions and validators that use the project role approvers. Each project has different members in their approver's role. An issue goes through the workflow in each project. The conditions and validators are checked against different sets of users in this role. The workflow stays the same. Only the membership in the approver's role changes on a project-by-project basis. Groups are global across Jira, so unless you created different groups for each project, you couldn't achieve the same flexibility. You might also have to create unique workflows. Additionally, project administrators can modify membership in roles, but not in groups. Bottom line, project roles are much more flexible and sustainable. As a best practice, use project roles instead of groups in workflow conditions and validators. You can also satisfy complex requirements by grouping and nesting conditions. And you can toggle the logic for how the conditions in a group are applied between all and any. In a grouping of conditions, either all of the conditions have to be met or any of the conditions have to be met. In this example, the only users who can execute this condition are either the reporter, who is also in the manager's project role, or members of the sales group. Let's put this all together and look at an example of how a transition with configured conditions appears in Jira. This is the Start Progress transition. It has 3 configured conditions. Let's first look at the inner nested conditions. We see that any of the following conditions must be met in the inner box. That means that users must be the assignee, or the user must be in the developer's or administrator's project roles. Either of these must be true. But then we look at the outer grouping, which says that all of the following conditions must be true. This means that in addition to the above, the third condition validates existing issue links. If issue links of the specific link type exist, namely is blocked by, then Jira checks whether they respect the constraint that their status must be in resolved or closed.